I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Laura Karpman, composer for American Fiction. Laura, as the saying goes, dying is easy, but comedy is hard. So is
Oh,
this also true for composers on a film that is so razor sharp funny?
it's I don't know that comedy is hard. I think that everybody has a different sense of timing and a different way of looking at, you know, what comedy is and how you deal with that musically. The film, it kind of has two edges. I mean, it has the comedic stuff, which is substantial and a good part of the film, but it's also got this family story running through the whole film, which in my view is really the most radical part, of everything that goes on in American fiction. And there's a lot of radical stuff that goes on in American fiction.
Yeah, you're so right. I like that dichotomy that we're dealing with some really huge conceptual ideas, big ideas about the state of things in society. But we're also looking at this guy, Monk, and his life, and he's feeling a little bit disconnected, and then the way that he moves forward through that. So when you're given a script like this, such a good script, how do you go about tackling how you want the music to sound? Because you could have gone in so many different directions.
Well, I'll tell you, the I actually got a meeting to first go view the film, which was, I think, at a director's cut stage. And to prepare for that meeting, I read the novel Erasure by Percival Everett. I didn't have a script. And I read the novel, I think, in one setting. And I mean, it's Gene, yes. And what it deals with is the life of an artist. It deals with race in America. It deals with, as I said, this family story in this upper middle class Black family. And so it really touches on a lot of issues. But the most musically suggestive issue, of course, is the main character's name is Thelonious Ellison, and his nickname is Monk. So obviously, it was going to be a jazz score. And so the question is, okay, do you want to do Monk's music? Do you want me to do a Monk-like theme? How are we going to address what is the obvious musical inspiration for Percival Everett and then for Cord Jefferson, the director and the writer? So in my first meeting with them, I said, look, we can go a number of ways with this. My one of my ideas was to use Ruby, My Dear, which is a famous, a Monk tune, as kind of the major, theme. Uh-oh, there's a big crash outside. And then the other idea was for me to write a Monk's theme that paid tribute to Thelonious, but also was my own thing. And so I rendered a couple of scenes with both ways of looking at it. And they chose my theme. That they wanted something original, and so that worked out great. In addition to that, I wrote a family theme that, I don't know, the family theme, the family thing has elements of Monk for sure, not as kind of sharp edged as the Monk theme does, but it's got elements of the kind of the way that he would play with his right hand. So I suppose that plays tribute to him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the breezy, jazzy elements in the score, the light percussive beats. And I think that's really effective tonally for where the film weaves its magic, which is in that space between the searing commentary on the state of our cultural politics and the genuinely amusing satire and family life.
Right.
So, did you ever struggle, though, to get that tone right and then go in a particular direction, or did you feel pretty much at ease from the get-go once you had decided to make it a jazzy score?
I think, we went through a lot of back and forth in terms of the first act. I don't want to well, I guess people have seen the film, but before, there's a sudden death in the film. And before that, like how far to go with the comedy, how acerbic to make the comedy. Because when you say, dying is easy, comedy is hard, I think with comedy, you want to give people permission to laugh. And there's some pretty edgy stuff in this. So my instinct was take it more to the edge, and then Cord and Ben Leclerc and Hilda, the editor, they wanted to pull it back a little bit. So I think that the biggest back and forth we had, it was in that first act, but I have to say that all the themes were really instantly approved. And, the bigger concepts like the three endings, my pathology, all of that really went pretty easily. And, because it's Monk, of course, it had to be a piano-based score. And so that was really, really amazing because I had just gotten back into my studio, my restored Steinway B that I inherited from my father. And, this thing, it's like a player piano. I mean, it almost just plays the music for you. So I started playing stuff, and then I brought in the iconic Patrice Rushen to bring her fingers and her mind and her soul to this project as well.
Wow. There's a scene in the first half of the film when Monk's writing his book and the two men from his imagination are arguing in front of him. That rolling piano score in the background swells as we watch him create these black stereotypes. This is what occurred to me with your score as well. It's really, the music is earnest rather than tongue-in-cheek. And as a composer, ultimately wanting, how did you want us to perceive Monk in moments like that? Did you want us to feel affection for him or sympathy for his predicament?
I love him. So, I mean, that's a great question. I think affection. I mean, I think because I felt affection for him, that came out. And that scene we took very seriously on purpose. The idea behind that, honestly, is I had been listening to Herbie Hancock's Gershwin's World, and he does the Ravel piano concerto. And basically what happens is he plays the Ravel, pretty straightforwardly, and then he starts doing his own changes on top of it. So I wanted that feeling of the sort of the string swells and then these kind of, almost Ravelian / jazz textures pianistically on top of that. But thank you for noticing that. That is, that's one of my favorite scenes in the film.
Yeah, it's that scene that kind of, there's always the scene that hooks you, whether it's at the beginning or towards the middle. And it was that for me. I was like, okay, I get it. I know what we're doing now. And of course, that all gets blown out of the water later on.
By the end of it.
Right. And so does that happen with you as well? Obviously, you know what's going to happen, but then you have to switch things up a bit towards the end as well. And so you're constantly pushing those boundaries. And what's that like as a composer? Is that scary, intimidating, or you just go with the flow?
No, I mean, I think in a situation like that, I mean, there are three endings to the film, all that require completely different musical treatments to sell them, right? And so you put yourself in the a serious headspace. It's like Elmer Bernstein when he scored Animal House. The whole thing about that was to take it super seriously, and that's what made it funny. So you're absolutely right in saying that each one of those scenes was scored completely earnestly to sell that was actually the ending, and you don't know as you're watching it the first time, what is going to happen. Of course, we've blown it now for everybody who watches that's going to watch it, but it doesn't matter. The film is like, listen, you can watch it 5 times. Sure. And it's, I mean, honestly, this film is a work of art. It's a piece of genius. Cord Jefferson, who's the writer and first-time director, is a brilliant man. And he found a way to talk about the life of an artist, important issues about what it is to be an othered artist. And of course, as I say, a really equally radical story of a family and how they interact. And he does it so that you can laugh at yourself, you can laugh at other people. And it's a warm, inviting place to share a tear and share a laugh.
Yeah, I could not have said it better myself. Laura, thank you for your time today. We'll bring you back shortly.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Gary Clark, composer and songwriter on Flora and Son. Gary, at the premiere screening of Flora and Son at Sundance last January, the audience embraced it with a spontaneous clap along and rapturous standing ovation. What does that kind of reaction to the music in particular mean to you personally?
Well, sadly, I wasn't actually at Sundance. I missed that. I just got the report. John Carney, the director, called me pretty much straight after it. And yeah, it's incredibly exciting because you don't know how a film is if it's gonna reach people at all. You're so inside it when you're making it, and then you just kind of pray that it's good. And at the end of the day, it's the human reaction that tells you what you need to know, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what I love about John Carney's films, this is like the latest of a string of love letters to how music brings us together and makes us feel. What are your thoughts on the profound effects that music has on us that the film actually explores?
Well, because it's had such a profound effect on me, I can't deny it. From when I was a toddler, I was just singing my lungs out and then begging to get a guitar to learn to play. And then I was very much like, the first movie I did with John was called Sing Street, which is about a school band. And we basically were comparing our lives, and we were both in that school band. And I've kind of lived my dream through music, really. And so that there's nothing shocking about it to me at all. I actually think it has such a profound effect on you. And we use music for so many things, to celebrate. We use it at funerals. We use it when we're alone. We use it in so many different ways when we're out jogging.
Yeah, that's right. And what this film explores is how Flora begins this journey with her mindset is, music is just there. And it's something that she can listen to, some EDM on the bus. The way the film explores a particular song is that it should stop time. And that really resonates with me because there's a moment where Flora's experiencing that emotional reaction to Joni and Mitchell performing both sides now. And frankly, that song, whenever I hear it, time does stop for me. It's just such an incredible song. And so I wonder, when you're writing music, does that ever occur to you? I want to be able to have whoever's listening to this stop what they're doing and just take it in and experience it.
You want your music to have the effect on others that listening to great music has on you. So yes. Do you think about it that squarely? No, I don't think you do, but I think when it's ultimately, I think that's what you want to do. You want to give that feeling that other people have given to you, and the feeling for me is massive.
Yeah. You've collaborated with John, as you say, on Sing Street, also on his series Modern Love before this film. What are the main reasons why you two keep coming back to each other? Why do you work so well together?
Well, I'm very grateful that John keeps calling me, but and at the end of the day, these are his films. So if he wanted to work with somebody else, then I'm sure that sometimes he will. But I'm just very glad that we do seem to have something that kind of clicks together. We both kind of come from, we're not trained musicians, but we come from playing in bands and stuff. So it's like we're a little band. And John is a really great songwriter and a great musician. And so it's quite comfortable, fun. Even when we're not in the middle of a film, we'll send each other little bits of jams or ideas for songs. And yeah, we just seem to have found a rhythm. We kind of work like a tag team, really. It's quite interesting. John will start something on his garage band and send it to me in a kind of half-finished state with little sketchy lyrics and stuff. And then I'll put it in Pro Tools and take it further and then send it back to him. We kind of bounce it like that. And then other times he'll just say to me, I need a song for this scene. And he'll just kind of set me free on it, So, yeah, we've seemed to have found a rhythm, which is nice.
Yeah. How does your decades of experience collaborating with pop and rock artists like Natalie Imbruglia and the Veronicas, Mochiba, Delta Goodrem, and Demi Lovato inform your approach to composing for film?
Well, in the song sense, as opposed to the score sense, I think it has a massive effect, and I didn't really realize it until I started to write songs for film. I mean, I'm absolutely obsessed with music in films and have been since I was a kid, and so and I've had quite a few placements in films. But until John called me, which is about 9 or 10 years ago now, I'd never actually been able to write something specifically for a film. But I had been writing a lot, as you say, with other artists for their records. And the process of that, I mean, because I actually started as an artist myself, so I could write about my own life. And then I had to learn it's not really about me, it's about the person who's going to be singing the song. And so when you collaborate with an artist, the first thing you kind of try and do is get into what's happening in their life, how they're feeling, what's going on. And so that, I would say, was my training ground for writing for characters, really. Not writing for myself, but trying to find the idea for the song in what they're going through. And John writes such great characters, so they're instantly inspiring, and the stories are inspiring.
Yeah. How challenging is it to overlay your score that you wrote for this film with all the needle drops that a film like Flora and Son is going to employ, obviously, and all the different songs that you've written as well? You don't want the score to be invisible and disappear. Obviously, it's there, and it's an important part of the emotional resonance of the film. So how did you make that equation when you were working on it?
Well, John's taught me a lot about score, or certainly the way that he likes score to be. He never likes it to be overly emotive or emotional or tell you what to think. Like, his thing about score is this kind of, and it's not background music either, but it has to have this kind of dignity, is a word that he uses quite a lot. And it's kind of like not overstating itself, and that's the challenge. So whenever I send something to John that's maybe, I might think it's an absolutely beautiful melody or something, but if it triggers that thing in him where he goes, no, you're telling me what to feel here, then he'll push back against it. And I've got really a bulletproof. I just go right back to the drawing board and come up with something else. There was one time, it's when we were working on Modern Love, and it was a particularly difficult montage that went through a lot of different emotions, from funerals to like people meeting and somebody going through a cancer, and it was and it was particularly difficult. And I did the first piece of music, John, exactly that. He said, no, it's too emotional, and then he said, just try some stuff on piano. So I sent him 3 different piano, really just me jamming to picture, and then I sent him them, and he gets back to me and he said, that one is absolutely killing me. And I said, what one? He said, the piano one. Yeah, but I sent you 3 piano pieces. It took me some deciphering to figure out which one he actually liked. But again, it was kind of the one that just sort of sat there and didn't push your buttons, So that's kind of a.
And then, of course, it builds that beautiful, satisfying climactic moment with High Life, which I just thought was the perfect way for the film to crescendo. But we will talk more about that when we bring you back for our group panel. Thank you, Gary, for your time today.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Anthony Willis, composer for Saltburn. Anthony, writer-director Emerald Fennell says you truly delivered on something incredibly sexy for the score. And I really would love to hear from you. Talk me through that vision for the film and its music.
Wow, okay, right in there. So
yeah.
the first thing Emerald really wanted was to capture the sense of the house and Saltburn and the gothic aspect. And she said to me right at the beginning, she said, Anthony, there aren't enough scores with organ. It's the best instrument ever. So a lot of it was about capturing this kind of classical world that Oliver wants to fit into, and he doesn't. And and throughout the film, he goes on a journey through kind of loneliness and romance and lust. So when it came to the lust, Emerald really liked the idea of some kind of visceral, subverted, something low that would give you that kind of throbbing feeling. And we talked about the idea of after you've had a night out, somebody's still partying, and at least when we were all younger, somebody's still partying, and you can kind of hear through the floorboards of the bedroom a kind of the afterglow of like a sort of synthy dance music or party music. So it was my challenge to go, okay, well, how can we do that but actually make it bespoke to this Gothic world and this world of organs? So I took an organ. We actually recorded it in Temple Church in London, which was a lot of fun to do. Hard to get in there because from their point of view, they're kind of like, films? We don't need films. Or if there's a church that's been here for hundreds of years, the Templar Knights are buried there. So and then I put it through a dance, synth, an LFO plugin that gave it that kind of visceral throb. And so that was the essence of it. And then added like harp, like way below its like just at the bottom of its range, that gives you that kind of visceral idea. Obviously, we associate harp as such a beautiful instrument, but when you take it way out of its zone, that it's a really interesting kind of visceral color that I like a lot. And and then adding sort of a cello quartet that just sort of has this longing and this wanting. And that's what's so cool about what Emerald's done with this film, is that there's the side of us that we really want to show everyone, and then what she does is she picks apart scenes where she's like, I'm going to show you something that people don't normally show of themselves, the longing and the wanting. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it was really about fitting that sound into the kind of the overall architecture of the score.
Yeah, because it is a really varied score. And you're also interplaying with the amazing needle drops on this film. It felt like a soundtrack to my days at university. I just wondered then, is that a challenge as well? Do you have to, in your mind, match or be consistent with the different songs that are being employed in the film, or are you quite free to do something on your own and just worrying more about the story?
No, Emerald, I mean, one of the many reasons Emerald's so wonderful to work with is she's such a musical egalitarian. She loves music from, she loves choral music, she loves organ music, she loves like really cool party music. And absolutely, like that was the goal with the soundtrack itself, was to evoke those kind of college days and the kind of songs we'd be hearing. One of the first assignments she gave me, which isn't related to the original score, but it was there's a really cool track, Loneliness, where Oliver gets lost in a maze, and she said, "Yeah, I just don't want to play through the song here. I want to twist it into score." And so I did a string piece that takes over, and it's kind of got Gothic arpeggios similar to a lot of the score. So there is that kind of meeting point, but they do sort of fulfill different purposes. The soundtrack is very much to evoke that nostalgia, and the score is to steer us on Oliver's journey through these different things. And actually, kind of, for people who've seen the film will know that the idea is it's sort of steering you away from certain things. That was a big part of it, was actually the structural role of the score, so that it steered you to what you're supposed to understand about this character's motivations. And then ultimately the end, everything is hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And in fact, that was my next question, because I wondered whether there was much temptation, or whether you were constantly paring back from telegraphing Oliver's true motives and agenda in scenes between him and Felix, or was it more always about being in the moment and really amplifying that magnetic connection between them in that moment, regardless of what he was trying to do?
I think one of the things that Emerald loves exploring about people is that we don't always just want one thing. We often want lots of things, and our motivations shift depending on what we experience. And certainly in terms of playing with the audience with that, yeah, she very much, it was very important to kind of stay in the moment and, you know, keep us guessing. I mean, Saltburn is it's a big maze. So the idea was this, it's a puzzle. And you kind of, right, when you get to the end of it, it all kind of comes, you put all the pieces together. So yeah, and that was a really fun part of it. And it's challenging, the psychology of that for sure. And obviously the performances are phenomenal. So you're kind of really living off that, and the cinematography is just so beautiful. So it was a real blast.
Yeah. Also, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the tracks in particular. We were talking earlier about that EDM angle. Felix Amica is an uplifting track that features those melodic house elements paired back a little with that kind of throbbing, relentless vibe to it. I find it really hard to explain, but I loved it, and I thought it paired so beautifully with all those mid-noughties deep cuts. Did that come to you relatively quickly once you got the concept of what you wanted it to sound like?
That was a really interesting one, and yeah, and I should have mentioned that in my answer earlier about the kind of bridge between the score and the songs in there. Emerald originally envisaged that as a song piece, but Victoria Brodell, the brilliant editor, had cut it in this really interesting time-lapse montage that had a lot of dialogue. So Emerald said, "Hey, can you write a piece that evokes the kind of thing that they would have been partying to, but that is still score?" And it's essentially a friendship. It's a friendship montage, but I put, I infused it with those kind of classical arpeggios that are sort of, again, this language that Oliver wants to possess, but then but in this case it's taken into like more of a fun party track. So I think it's really fun to push and try and do something that's a little different, and see where you can thread that line across lots of different musical needs.
Yeah, and then of course you really lean into that gothic horror, gothic romance, which is maybe the same thing. On tracks like A Shared Bathroom and The Maze, where I'm going to explain this in my layman's terms, but like you use stretched out strings, pensive kind of percussive strings, and then these rapidly descending chords that elicit a sense of unease and mystery. And I'm just wondering whether that kind of music comes quite easily to you, or was that something that you really had to work on quite hard?
I think we all work as hard as we can on everything. I mean,
Yeah.
it for me, what Emerald wanted for The Maze was, I was a chorister in England when I was younger, and obviously the film really pushes into this sort of English style. So it's really supposed to play like a mournful hymn with a sort of horrific angle to it, but it's a mournful, it's mourning loss, and hopefully this isn't too spoilery, but yeah, it's deeply mournful, and then ends with a solo treble, on his own. That was, for me, that was lovely, because I was kind of pulling into that core background that I have. And yeah, the romance of it was really important. And again, I tried to do it in a kind of classical way where Oliver's theme is, at the forefront, and threaded throughout.
Yeah. And I think you used the perfect word earlier. And a lot of what he's doing and what you're doing is about this longing, this yearning. And and I just think it comes through so beautifully through your music. Thank you, Anthony, for your time today. We'll bring you back shortly for our group chat.
Thank you so much.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Michael Giacchino, composer for Society of the Snow. Michael, for your first Spanish film, you reunited with J.A. Bayona, who calls you chameleon-like, and in your ability to narrate through music, turning this harrowing story into something relevant and universal. So what attracted you to this challenge?
Well, number one was working with Juan Antonio, who I love, working with. We've been friends for 20 years, and and our friendship wasn't based on work. It was just based on the fact that we love movies, we love film scores, and we are just so adamant about the love of sort of practical filmmaking. And so when Jurassic World came around, that was like just a gift thrown at both of us that we got to work together. So on this one, he happened to be in town when he was bringing the film to show some people, to get some notes on the cut. And he always brings his films by for me to look at. We talk about them, and I just fell in love with the movie instantly. It was a story that I remember even from when I was a kid. I not growing up anywhere near South America. To have a story still reach into the suburbs of New Jersey the way that story did. It was like, it was just so, I don't know. So there's something so ingrained in me about that story, because as kids, we would always talk about that. We would sleep out in a tent at night. It was almost became its own little ghost story in a way. But then to be able to visit that and actually experience what it was that the people went through who survived that experience, and not just the ones who survived, but what the ones who didn't survive went through and what they endured. That to me felt like a very personal journey that I just really wanted to take with Juan Antonio.
Yeah, I totally understand that, because when everyone seems to know about this story, and for example, for an Australian, this story means it's all about mateship, which is basically our religion, and so that really I just think is so beautifully done in this film by Bayona. He just does a beautiful job. Some of the most distinctive tracks, though, on the score, they utilize these poignant and haunting choral elements to great effect, like the elegy after the men go through with that harrowing decision, to survive by eating flesh, which is something that seems so repugnant. But I just think the way that you were able to score those particular pieces really amplified the emotion for me. And I'm just wondering, were there a lot of difficult choices to make when you got that score locked in?
I think, the most difficult thing on a film like this is, and at least for me, with the way that I work on film scores, is, I really do try to put myself in the shoes of the person that I'm writing for, in the shoes of the character. How would I feel if that were me there? So in most films, you're dealing with something that isn't quite real. We all know Spider-Man's not real, but I can still put myself in his shoes. But when you're putting yourself into the shoes of someone who lived and breathed and actually went through the experience that you're watching, that's a wholly different thing. So I would go days of being in that space with these people, and at the end of the day, just be completely wiped out emotionally, because you're really forcing yourself. Because for me, it was the only way I could really get to the truth of what the music should do, because it's a movie that you could easily score in a very sort of, I want to say, fantastical way. It could be more adventure than anything else, or more, and I wanted it to just feel real. And so including things like the choir, to me, that was a way of giving a voice to the people who didn't have a voice at that moment, and those were the ones who either passed away or were well on their way to passing away. And it was just so important to me to have their voices sort of carry the characters up and over the mountains into a place where they could hopefully be found and saved. Because I do believe that the ones who stayed up on that mountain that day, they were the reason, they were the sole reason why everyone else was able to make it off. And so we live at a time where we're constantly hear the stories of the survivors, but for me, and I know for JA, it was really important to tell the stories of those, that give a voice to those who didn't have a voice. Yeah.
On the flip side to that, there's some tracks, like, for example, in the days after the crash, the men are coming to terms with their fate. The music features these high-pitched sounds that have this kind of alien horror aesthetic, with these single notes chiming strings, and they become more dense and jarring as the survivors are carrying out the dead. To me, that's emblematic of dread, isolation, helplessness, perfectly. And I'm just wondering, was that the outcome you were trying to achieve?
That was exactly what I wanted to do, because as we talked about it, what I was saying was like, you're in a situation like that. I don't believe you're going to just sit there and be sad about it. This is not a time for sadness. This is a time for, and I can imagine if you woke up that next morning and looked outside where you were, you would feel like you were on Mars. That place that they landed was as alien to them as anywhere else, anywhere out in far space or anywhere at the bottom of the ocean. And you might as well be that far away, because that was not a place that they had any experience living in prior to that. So to me, it was about this bleakness. I kept thinking of this word bleakness, and that's how I would feel. And then how do you, out of that bleakness, pull the strength you need to move on and move forward, right? How do you do that? And that's not going to be out of sadness. That's going to be out of closing your eyes, taking a deep breath, and taking one just painful step at a time to try and get to somewhere where you can hopefully find safety. And that's what they did day after day after day. And it wasn't a situation where everyone is just feeling sorry for themselves. It was, how do I get out of this nightmare? How do I get out of this alien environment I found myself in?
So what techniques and instrumentation did you typically employ to create that sense of peril and unease?
When we first watched the film together, there's temp music in there and different things. And it wasn't doing for me what I really was hoping it could do, and temp music is called temp music because it's temporary and it's just something there. But for me, after we watched it, I asked him to come into the other room. I said, come to the other room where my piano was. And I said, I said, to me, we could sit here and play these really sad chords. I said, that's one way to do it. I said, but to me, this film really feels more like this. And I just reached inside the piano and grabbed the strings and plucked them really hard. And it was like this chang kind of a thing. I was like, that's what the movie really feels like to me. I said, I feel like if we do this other softer thing, it's not going to tell the true story. And to me, the true story is somewhere inside the piano where no one ever goes. It's somewhere inside the instrument that no one ever plays. It's using these instruments in ways, and even the choir, having them, it's almost like a calling out for help in a lot of the cues, the way that they're singing. It's very emotional in that sense. So it was always for me trying to get to the emotional truth of what was happening, and how could I do that musically without overstepping, because it's very easy to get melodramatic in a thing like this. So how it was constantly monitoring that, along with living inside these emotions that everyone was feeling, and along with just day after day, I would come home at night and I would just be depressed, because you're just in some ways, as a composer, and I'm sure everyone here would agree that it's you are an emotional reflection of the character. So in order to be truthful in that, you have to embody that. It's like an actor will have to do that many times. And it's a similar thing, at least for me it is. I wish I could do it another way, because it'd be a lot easier, but it's hard.
Well, speaking of feeling something, the film gives us the satisfying ending that we know it's coming, but it just really doesn't disappoint. It's so beautifully done. I'm still in awe of how the music that you used, the track's called Found, is such a tearjerker, much like your iconic Married Life from Up. You don't hold back on that one at all, and I just thought it was such a highlight. Can you talk me through, was that difficult to get right?
To me, yeah, it is, because that is an example of the exhale that you're granted at the end of this harrowing experience. I imagine that they didn't have a chance to just exhale and relax ever during this experience. And to me, the music at that moment, that's what that is to me. It's about breathing again. It's about letting everything out and then bringing in something fresh. And I know that sounds weird and it's hard to explain, but that's to me what it kept feeling like. I just need a moment to breathe easy again, and not because of tension or action or anything like that, but because of pure fear of not knowing what's next, and they finally got to a point where they were able to know what's next, and it was something good for once. So to me, it was just about that it's about breathing, you know?
Yeah, you're 100% right. After 2 hours or whatever the film's length is, it's a real moment to go, okay, everything's going to be fine.
Yes.
Michael, thank you for your insight. We're going to bring you back right now for our group chat.
Sure.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, and I am delighted to be joined by some of the most acclaimed composers working today. Laura Karpman from American Fiction, Gary Clark from Flora and Son, Anthony Willis, Saltburn, and Michael Giacchino for Society of the Snow. Okay, so I would love to know what is your number one priority? I'm going to go to you first, Laura. What is your number one priority when writing music that will elicit a strong emotional response from the audience? What goes through the back of your mind? You've been working on films for years now. What do you do when you want to really go for the emotion?
Well, I just have to stop this entire conversation and talk to Michael, because Michael, Spider-Man is real.
Oh, I know that. I know.
And
you know what I mean. What I'm saying.
You destroyed my whole world.
No. What I'm saying.
Stop the conversation.
What I'm saying is, you're safe at the end of a Spider-Man movie. You're safe at the end because.
You said we could talk over each other. I'm literally going to leave this and get in the car to go premiere the Marvels.
Which is awesome. You should.
They're all real, okay?
Yes, they're real in that bubble. They're real in that bubble. They are real in that bubble. They're absolutely real within that bubble. But I can tell you that I sat here at my house with the two survivors from that crash, and suddenly my mind was blown up into a different perspective that I had never had before working on films. All my life I had said, it doesn't matter if it's Captain Kirk or Remy the Rat, they're all real. They all have these hopes, wishes, and dreams and problems that they're dealing with, and we are with them through it all. But in the end, I never sat with any of them out in my backyard and heard the true stories of what was going on and what I just said. So for me, it was a very different experience in that sense, and just dragged me into an emotional hole that I had never been before. So that's all I meant. That's all I meant, Laura.
No, I get it. And I'm just teasing you. And what's funny about that, which is so interesting, because I've spent so much time working on documentaries, right? Because that's been kind of the arc of my career. And what happens in a documentary is, of course, the people are real, right? They're real people, they have real stories. But the minute the aperture of the camera is put on them, they become a character in a film. So it's all, it's all like Michael said, it's really playing with empathy. It's really playing with emotion. It's being, your most empathetic self. I mean, I think that kind of answers your question, Rob. What was your question? I don't remember.
Well, I think what he's saying, I think the idea that we all want to tell the truth of the character that is sitting before us.
That's right.
We all need to get to the truth of that character. That's our job. And
you have to be, film scoring is an exercise in total empathy, right? You've got to be able to identify and feel the pain and feel the happiness and feel everything that these characters are going through, whether they're real or not. It's the same thing. And then somehow you have to decide how that sounds, what does that emotion sound like? I mean, that is the craft of it. And of course, every single one of us might come up with a completely different musical rendition of what that emotion sounds like in any given situation, which is what makes this one of the most fascinating things I've ever done in my life.
Wow. See,
I think to elaborate on that, I think certainly I do this, and I'm sitting on this panel with people I greatly admire and have since before I was doing this. But for me, it all started by being an audience member, and so my priority is to try to recapture the feeling that I had as a kid and beyond when I watch things. I think I find it harder and harder to exit the process, even as an audience member now, just because we have so many attachments, whether it's, oh, my friend worked on that, or my friend wrote that, or I know that where that was recorded, or maybe I was up for that job, or whatever it is. And so really that's my priority, is to try and capture into the essence of what it was like to be in the audience and like to fall in love with films.
Wow. What about you, Gary?
Well, I was just thinking there about when you find a quick time of one of the versions of a scene that didn't work, and you go back and you go, oh my God, that was so wrong. You kind of just, why didn't I know that was so wrong? But it's part of the journey, isn't it? You've got to try some stuff, and it's just like, you ever do that where you go back and find something that hit the cutting room floor, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, please. I look at things now that I thought I did right and realize, oh God, I did not do that as right as I had thought or hoped. That's why I don't like looking at the things that I finished anymore. I'm like,
Yeah, I don't either.
keep looking this way.
Wow. Yeah, that's really fascinating, because I think any of us who love film have our favorite film scores and composers. For some reason, film nerds and just the public have a real affinity and affection for film and TV composers, because you really do make us feel something. And I know that when I listen to Michael Nyman's The Piano, which I still do to this day, it does things in my mind that are very hard to explain, and because it really makes me feel something. I'm curious, I know that you all probably don't like to listen to too much current composers' work because you don't want it to influence your own work, but do you all have those composers or film scores that you think are genius, that you love, that you've carried with you over the years? Who would like to go first?
I always think of Paris, Texas, Raikuda, that slide guitar sounding like the desert, you know.
Oh yeah.
There's just, I'm a guitarist as well, as you can probably see from all these guitars. But there's something about, I'd actually love to score a whole film with just one guitar. I'd love to score a film with just one guitar. But that was one of those ones that really that kind of opened my mind to what you could do with a film score.
Wow.
It wasn't what you expect.
I mean, I always loved Jerry Goldsmith because he was so experimental with everything. It wasn't always just the orchestra. It was, you know, he was tearing apart things and people were bringing him weird things to bang on. And he would just be like, yep, let's put that in there. Like these ideas. And it was Planet of the Apes, the first time I saw that movie as a kid, that just sort of like blew me away with what you could do with sound and music that I hadn't ever thought of before. You know, I always admired him in so many ways because he could do it. He could do it all.
And it's so interesting, Michael, that you then ended up working on a Planet of the Apes film.
Yes, I know. And I was obsessed with Planet of the Apes when I was a kid. Believe me, I don't even want to go into the ways in which I was obsessed. I was just obsessed. But I was lucky to then work with Emil Richards, who was an incredible percussionist, who also worked with Jerry on those movies. And he brought a lot of the instruments to the scoring session that he used on the original. We were able to play around with those. So it was really wonderful just to hear those stories through someone who's really spent time with him and knew him.
Wow. What about you, Anthony?
I mean, as a kid, I loved any score that was associated with building a world. You know, Braveheart and James Horner's beautiful work took you into this incredible romantic setting in Scotland, and you know, obviously had a period feel to it. Gladiator, I loved. Titanic, I loved. Anything that was kind of helping to create, you know, recreate something. And I couldn't, I think just in general in filmmaking, I couldn't believe the lengths that people would go to build things and sink them and break them, and you know, so musically for me, that was the spark. It's like, oh, there's a real need here, there's a job here to be done. And obviously then that becomes much more special when you're dealing with contemporary emotions and you know, the kind of the needs of our sound world today are actually, I think, harder to score because we're not referring to, you know, sort of existing references. So yeah, James Horner, you know, always loved his music, and you know, and all my peers today, everyone on this panel, I mean, it's amazing what people are continuing to reinvent. So yeah, we're really lucky to do this.
Final word to you, Laura.
Well, it's hard. I mean, there's so many great scores. I mean, the one that I think is probably the most iconic for me is North by Northwest. And I think it's because, you know, you talked about about comedy. The thing about that theme is it works comedically and it works also for suspense. So, and that's pretty masterful. It gets big and small. It uses the orchestra terribly imaginatively. And I just think it's fantastic. But, you know, There's also other stuff I love. I love Anna Meredith's score for 8th grade. I think that was an incredibly underrated score and really captured what it was like to be a young person and sort of the hero of your own story. You know, we could go on. I could sit here and compliment my darling friend, Michael, you know, till the cows come home with 53,000 scores that he's written, and my other colleagues. So I think we all respect each other a lot. I think there's sometimes just things that touch our heart, you know, Man with the Golden Arm. I mean, there are lots of them that I absolutely adore.
Yes. It's just, yeah, this conversation could go for hours, because I think we all have those scores that we carry with us. I have so many other examples, but I'll leave it there. Thank you, all of you, so much for your time today. What an amazing panel to get to host. Good luck on this very exciting awards journey. And again, we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, and it was great to meet all of you. This is it's you know, this is something we don't get to do that often, is actually get together with composers. So that's always nice to hear. I loved hearing what you all had to say.
Best of luck to everybody.
And we'll see Laura and
Thank
Michael
you all.
on Thursday.